Welcome, data people. We are Zuma. My name is Matt, and this is Data for Good. This podcast is brought to you by Zuma. Zuma is a dedicated recruitment company for senior data, insights, and analytics professionals, connecting you with Berlin's most influential companies. The Data for Good podcast is for the world of data analytics and engineering, giving you access to the thoughts and opinions of Berlin's most successful data people. Today, we are joined by Adam Mullen, Director of Engineering at Vinted. We've been looking forward to this podcast. It's going to be a juicy episode. Adam is going to talk to us about data privacy. Adam, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, Matt. Thank you for asking. Yes, I'm Adam Mullen. I'm a Director of Engineering, but I'm working in the privacy space, specifically around member and employee data and the privacy that we have. So there's the tie-in there. Maybe your listeners are wondering why is the Director of Engineering on here? There's the answer. But we're doing some interesting things at Vinted, but and while I work for them, I thought I should call out that anything I say here is about the opinions and the views that I have, and not necessarily Vinted. Although we do use a lot of the practices that I might talk about today. So, do you have any questions to start off with, Matt?
Well, yeah. Privacy is a huge topic at the moment. It's very relevant. This is an area that you have a huge passion for. I think to start off with, where did your journey start? How did you become so aware of data privacy?
Well, it's something that's been part of my various roles for past couple of decades. Usually, it's more focused on in the internal processes and the controls that we have around the information and the data that the companies that I work for use. So I'm always interested to see what people are concerned about happening and how to prove to other people that we're actually doing the things that we need to do, whether it's SOC 2 compliance, ISO 27001, 27007 kinds of things that you might do. But now at Vinted and having the user base that we have, I really got into it because there's so many users and so many different places where people use the platform that we're in, and some of these places have popped up as being at risk in our the current geopolitical landscape. We're a Lithuanian company. We're right next door to some pretty not nice things happening in the world. So what could we do to make sure that if anything happened anywhere where our members are, that people are safe? And it really got me to thinking about how much we are doing and could be doing to help people safeguard their privacy and their right to just be the type of person that they want to be without fear of repercussions, both just as our company, but also as technologists in general. And plus we have all that GDPR stuff too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think reassurance is something that a lot of people need right now. A lot of people don't really know the data infrastructure and what is happening when they're on the web. So I think it is a responsibility of companies taking that data to look after it. And it's an area that isn't always a priority. So using data privacy by design. So making sure that privacy is a priority in planning and the way the product is structured. You're heading up projects like this. How should a company use and be treating its consumers and users' data?
Well, I think it really depends on the kind of company you are. And this I think this is more of an important question, I think, for the users than it is the companies themselves. What kind of company do you want to be giving this information to? How do you know that they're going to use it? And I think that for the companies themselves, knowing at the very least, you should know where this data is going and how it's being used. But we've seen very recently, wasn't there a Senate committee hearing last week where some engineers of big companies stood up and said, yeah, we actually we just hoover it all up and we're not exactly sure where it might end up or how it's being used. Maybe even introducing the argument that no one person could ever really know how any of this stuff is being used. So as a company, trying to figure it out afterwards is very expensive. And like I said, it never gets the attention that it needs. It needs a lot of energy, and energy being things like people's time, your budgets, the opportunity costs you might spend doing other things. It takes a lot of work to reverse engineer where all this information is going. And that's where that privacy by design idea comes in. I think a lot of startups feel that we're too small. It's a premature optimization to take these things into consideration. But I don't think it actually fits into that category of things like monolith versus microservices, premature optimization. I think that there's a definite benefit to following, well, what is a mandate in the GDPR to have some sort of program of privacy by design. And it goes further than, I think a good company would ask, how does this feature, how might we get in trouble with regulations? How might we violate people's rights to privacy or otherwise impact them with this feature? That's what a good company would do. A great company would actually take that by design and through design idea to heart and make it a first-class concern. How is this feature that we're going to build going to make privacy and security better for people? Asking that question at the very beginning and making privacy a first-class concern of the quality of service that you provide to people takes away the need to go and refactor and retroactively tack on the privacy at some point in the future. And this just makes good sense. We've all seen like the software defect removal curve in terms of time and money. It's like what, 650 something times more expensive to remove a defect after it's already in production than it is if you're addressing it in development. It's even cheaper to address those things by framing the design of the feature in a way that keeps, with good requirements engineering, keeps the engineers in a path where they're not going to develop things that would need to be corrected during development or testing either. So you could you could spend a euro's worth of time working on this question of how does this feature actually make users more secure in their privacy? Or you could spend 650 of those euros later on after you've already deployed it and you have to undo all this stuff. So I think that speaks against the argument that it's a premature optimization to ask these questions. Really, if you start doing it right now, you get up on the right foot. Plus, you start to really you start to build that trust from your user base. I don't know. What does that sound like to you?
Prevention over cure. I think it's definitely proven. What I would question there is how important is education at the start? How does someone know? One person might see an email address as that's just an email address. Another person might see that as you cannot have my email address. I don't want you emailing me. So where do we put education into the importance of various data points?
I think that's a very good question, because you have to know when you're getting into something that might be a little bit thorny or impactful. And there's different people that are going to have different perspectives on that information. An engineer might not consider the same things to be problems that, say, a marketing person or a data scientist might. So having at least a baseline of understanding of what is personal data at your organization or company is important for everybody. And then if you're using good software design and development practices, those people can bring the definition that they have in their heads, the view of it that they have, to the discussion. And then once you have something that you've all hit on as a good possibility, there's people who are experts in this field that you can bring into the discussion. Hopefully there's somebody at your organization who is monitoring the data privacy aspects. If you've got a data protection officer, for example, working over in legal or finance, that you can call and you can ask questions. A lot of companies I've seen have an agreement with an external data protection officer service that they can call and ask these questions to. So we call them at Vinted, we call them privacy smells. We try to help people recognize when they can smell smoke, and then they know our QAs are our smoke detectors.
Right.
They know to set off the alarm bells and bring in the firefighters, the privacy team. You might not have a full privacy team like we do, but helping people to understand these things, finding ways to support that innate passion that they have, and giving them responsibility is the other part of that education. If you fill somebody's head with a bunch of great knowledge, but then you shoot them down every time they try to exercise it, that's also an anti-pattern. So maybe there's a role within your organization. Maybe there's a particular guild or chapter that is part of all of the things that you do that seems to be more interested. Maybe it's data science and analytics. Maybe it's quality assurance, because privacy is a dimension of quality in my book. But there's somebody out there on every one of your teams that probably has a reason to care. Maybe the approach is or perspective is different, but they can at least smell the things that they need to smell in order to bring somebody into that. Maybe it's your security team. Privacy and security are pretty interrelated.
I was just going to say, I think people are very, very aware about security. A lot of banking is digital and money doesn't tend to go missing. So security is very, very strong, and the strict protocols. How can we bring that into privacy? I mean, first of all, what is the difference between privacy and security?
I have a personal answer for that. And it's like, if you think about chemistry and physics, chemistry is just applied physics. Physics is just applied math. It's some sort of harder thing that has more rigor around it, that manifests itself as something tangible to whomever is looking at it at that level of abstraction. So I would say that privacy is like the expression of security to people. It's a not a corner case, it's not an edge case of it, but it's a special flavor of security that's relevant to your members, your clients, your users, and your employees. If you are insecure, it's very unlikely that you'd be able to make any kinds of warranties towards how private you're keeping the information. Now, and privacy to you as a person might be different than privacy to me. There are different things that I'm concerned about, but without the security teams giving those tools and providing that platform, or at least the basis for being able to make sure that only people who I want to see certain information about me can see that, the privacy doesn't happen. That's my explanation of the relationship between security and privacy. Now, you're on more of the data science and analytics side of this. What's would be your interpretation of security and privacy from that perspective?
From the data science side, is where is the data coming from is a big point. I think, we've got this log of information, but where is it coming from? Should the data scientists and the analysts be thinking, this is great findings, but is it ethical? Are we getting these insights the right way, or are we turning a blind eye to it because it's given us some great insights, some great information? So how can we train our data scientists? Because they could say, oh, the data's there, I'm just using what's there. But how much responsibility do we put on these individuals to be smelling out the breaches or the shady gray area data?
Yeah, I think with this kind of topic, we're looking at security and access management on one hand. Can the people who should see these things is it okay for them to see it? That's one side, because you have people who could be bad actors anywhere. You could turn into a bad actor tomorrow under the right set of circumstances. Not you, but one might. I don't know you that well, but I'm willing to make that assertion. So you want to keep track of, you want to minimize the surface area there of that risk. There's also, can you put this information together in a way that allows you to go from something that was relatively depersonalized or even anonymized? Can you put this information together in such a way that you can de-anonymize somebody, or you can personalize, put this in a personal context? Like one of the examples that we use a lot at Vinted is, maybe there's a village in Lithuania where there's only one male user in that entire 50-person population of the town, and maybe if we this gets into like K anonymization levels, like maybe it is possible to say, okay, give me every male, which is not necessarily personally identified or personal data, who lives in this area. That area is not necessarily personal data. With a Vinted account, not necessarily personal data, but those three things taken together, oh, we've got just one person. If you're like, I think a system that highlights this fairly well and has good guardrails is Pecan. If your organization uses the feedback tool, it's kind of like a employee satisfaction survey there.
Okay.
They generally will not let you see the results from a team if there's only like 3 people in the team, because if you see something as a manager that you don't like, there's a real good opportunity for you to go and suss out who it was that said those things. We don't want that.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah. So we want to be able to ensure that kind of situation isn't possible either with the data that we would collect, at least in my organization. Some organizations, actually, that's their entire bread and butter. So if that's who you're working for, maybe this topic isn't for you. But and I hope I'm not tipping too much of our hands here on how we accomplish those things. But if you're looking at information, and you're, as a data scientist or an analyst, can play a game, and you can de-anonymize somebody out of the different and recombine some of these disparate pieces of information into something that allows you to identify a particular person or a group of people, maybe you should consider whether or not this is something that you want to enable within the system. Maybe put some guardrails in there where if working with your infrastructure teams, if a result set is fewer than a certain amount, take extra steps and precautions around those things. You can also not store the raw stuff that you get. And this is also a financial decision too. I know data scientists and the analysts and the designers, whenever we ask, what information do you need? They go, all of it. How long do you need to keep it around for? Forever. That's the common answer. But challenge yourself, do we really need all of it? Can we either use some anonymization techniques on that data? Stripping out, say, octets of IP addresses, so we can say from which country or which locale a transaction originated, but not necessarily down to the person's street address. Maybe we don't need to store the whole. If you want to work with your teams and do a legitimate impact, you need to check for like the legitimate interest assessments on the information that you're collecting. Do we really need to know all about this type of information in order to make this kind of thing happen with our product? If the answer is no, don't keep it around. Keeping stuff around that you don't need is a great way to get yourself in trouble with regulators, but also to open yourself up to breaches. So illegitimate interest assessments with either an external or internal team that focuses on privacy helps. You can look at those business processes and analyze, what information do we actually need and at what level? You might need to keep some of this information around in a very granular form for certain regulatory requirements, like anti-money laundering things. But again, with the data access and controls, making sure that only the people who have a need to see those things, and you could point to them and say, arrest those people, officer, they're the ones that did it. If something goes wrong, that it is how you control for those things. So yeah, making sure that you keep only what you actually need to do to answer the questions that you need to answer. You can always ask questions again later. For example, if you find, oh, now that we've iterated on this feature to this point, it would have been helpful to know this as well. Well, then you're a going concern. You can start adding that to your data set later, but always have like the bias of collecting less, have the bias of making sure that what you do collect can't be combined to meaningfully identify other people. And then, if all else fails, making sure that you can tell an auditor, for example, who has access to this information and who has access to this information in case something does happen. And that definitely speaks to the relationship to security, because security is very about. They have all the logs, they know who's been looking at what, and that way you can demonstrate, the auditor phrases, demonstrate the control as documented. If somebody comes and asks and says, like, show me what happened on Tuesday, the 36th of whenever, and they come back and you can say, for sure this happened and it happened according to our processes.
Yeah, and as the requirement and the need for privacy to be ever featured within a structure within a company is no longer just a nice to have, it's in fact becoming a human right in a lot of cases, and we hear that in companies that I guess that's the Valhalla for a lot of people, that privacy becomes a human right. Where do you see it currently?
I think that most companies are focusing on privacy as a regulatory requirement. And I don't know if it's because the proposed legislation in the US or the existing legislation in Europe with GDPR puts a lot of focus on being fined and what could happen if you don't do things right. So there's this obligationist kind of perspective to it. And at the end of the day, I think corporations can only really, they don't operate under a duty-based kind of ethics. They operate under an obligationist kind of thing. We do what it's almost utilitarian. The ends justify the means. The profits justify what we do, and we do only when we restrict ourselves only when it comes to the letter of the law. This is also easier to follow and make the argument for, because if you can go to a CIO and say, hey, buddy, you're going to jail, or hey, buddy, you're going to have to pay this amount of fines if you don't fix these things, you get some traction there.
Yeah.
If it turns into, oh, if you don't do a good thing for people's privacy exposure, well, then you could lose out on some business. You need a much harder argument there, and the argument of, hell, we should spend 5 million, 50 million, whatever millions to do something just because we want to be good people. That's something that doesn't really win out in a lot of corporate environments. Maybe in some other public sector things, but the private sector it's hard to find those things. So I think most places are not focused on the human right just yet. But I would put forth the assertion that if you start from the human rights kind of perspective, what kind of duty would we like people to have becomes easier to implement. The requirements become easier to implement. They're easier for the people at your organization to understand, and it keeps you closer to safe harbor. But it's also regulation written by, lawyers and non-technologists, and it's also almost like 8 years old now in case of GDPR. So it's a little behind the times. So that's not necessarily enough. You still do have to worry about the compliance risks and things like that. But if you're looking at it as a human right, it keeps you closer to safe harbor on stuff that could really get you in trouble.
What needs to happen next to improve this status quo?
Good questions. The cynic in me says heavy fines, and really, I think the biggest fine yet handed down by the German authorities was due to I think it's Article 22 infraction. The GDPR requires us to have a program of privacy by design. It's right there in the regulation, in the legislation. It's really vaguely and poorly spelled out, but that was the one that a German company has been nailed the hardest on. So I think that if the German government, for example, continues to focus on the existence of a privacy by design and default program within the organization and being able to demonstrate that that's there, that might be the next step towards starting at the beginning and helping the stuff that falls out the end be in a better state. But I think that that fear of being fined, and it can be massive amounts, is what needs to happen next in order for people to take more notice. And it's kind of like the thing, like you hear about it happening to other people, but you never think about it happening to you until it happens to your company. So I hope it doesn't have to get to that point. Well, the non-cynical side, the optimist in me says, we look at the situations that are going on in the world and we ask ourselves, are the euros and the dollars that we could earn this quarter worth our customers leaving us because they've cottoned on to the game, because people are becoming much more savvy about this? Is it worth losing the 10x, 100x that in the total lifetime value of these customers? Is it worth this acting like this? And hopefully people starting to say, no. We see like all the flare-ups around in browser war 3.0 now, between more privacy-oriented options like Mozilla pitted against the Chromes and the Safaris and the Internet Explorers of the world. They're all great products for most people. I think that in the past, there was a smaller subset of people who would just stick to one of those products because of how they treated privacy. And I don't know, maybe it's just my own bubble, but I hear a lot more conversations from the developer community, especially, but also places outside of the developer community that you wouldn't have thought of. The marketing community is another one where we're talking about how the tools that we optimize our workflows for, inform our users about our stance on these things and how we want to continue to support them. Cookies may go away, but what other kinds of tracking things are out there? People are becoming much more savvy. Have you seen these articles? Maybe this is my litmus test. Have you seen these things going across the airwaves, these conversations happening?
I think Spain, I think, has handed out quite a few big ones. I saw, I think, an 80 million fine handed out recently, and more articles are popping up that do you take it into your own hands? Should we be relying on a company to have strict privacy regulations, or should we be taking it upon ourselves to use VPNs, DuckDuckGo versus Google, Mozilla over Chrome? Should it be our own responsibility to protect ourselves, or should we rely on company goodwill and or regulatory um, governing bodies to protect us, I guess?
Yeah, I think that well, you saw how long it took to get GDPR passed, and you saw, and you see how long it or how quickly it's being updated and adapted, not very quickly. So I think that if you want to stay ahead of that as an individual, you start becoming, you need to get a little bit more privacy awareness around these things for yourself and protecting yourself. Hopefully the tools remain available. And I think the only way that they do though is if we have people who are using them. So it's a little bit of a reinforcing loop there that needs to happen. Maybe that's something for the listeners here. Ask that question: how can you better safeguard your privacy? What tools are out there, and take a look into maybe some of the issues that really might concern you, or at least the company and the products that you work on. You might be surprised to see some of the gaps that are out there that are maybe not commercially lucrative yet, but we didn't think a lot of the surveillance capitalism type stuff. We would have thought this was all Star Trek kind of science fiction 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the legislation will take a long time to catch up to those things. That would be my answer to your question. I wouldn't leave it up to the regulators solely. They can provide the stick, but you need to provide the carrot in terms of dollars and euros that you would spend with these companies in order to lead them into the direction that you would want them to go into.
Yeah. And I think it's more and more data is being used, it's being tracked. But I think the awareness is massive. Personal awareness of what is being used, and also maybe thinking ahead. Data that you think won't be used probably will be in the future. IoT devices here, there, everywhere. I still think things like Apple Watches and Fitbits have yet to be tapped into. But
I think that it's just because the market isn't ready to pay for the information that's there. I don't know if you're familiar with the company or the application Strava for runners and cyclists. They were able, their original business model, I believe, was to offer the service as cheaply as possible for free in most cases, because they were going to help, they were going to use their data sets to help municipalities plan out their infrastructure. Where should we put roadways? How can we make our cities more cycling friendly, more enjoyable for people? What routes are people using? What attracts people? But the municipalities weren't really ready to pay for that yet. So about, I think it was like 2 years ago, they started to try and monetize their platform other ways. If that changes, that data now becomes much more valuable that they're collecting with your Apple Watches and your Fitbits and those kinds of things. Maybe if the US ever goes some kind of single payer healthcare system, for example, now Apple knows who gets off their butt and moves around and to what extent and in what areas, and how we might have to structure some of the claims and the different the premiums for classes of people get very fine grained. Somebody could make a lot of money doing that. If you're listening and you want to use that, feel free to use that, because I have no interest in it.
Well, some insurance companies have started using it to incentivize people to be healthy. But what's the other end? Are people going to be start penalized with that same set of data? which is probably not what we want to see. It usually starts with good intention and ends up on the dark side, shall we call it. Well, time has flown. It's been a fantastic conversation, Adam. Let's wrap up with a final question and touching on what we just spoke about then. What would the number one tip be to become more data privacy aware?
I think that it doesn't take much. Go on Reddit and read the World News subreddit. One of the biggest ones there, and scroll through, and I bet you on the first page, there's something talking about how your information, the things that identify you as a person, are being used to either sell you things in a way that you didn't like, or to make up policy or commercial decisions about you that are disfavorable to you. I think especially in the next couple of weeks up until the end of the year, with all the browser war things going, with the different tracking changes in how we track people, you just really have to open your eyes and be curious and look. If you want to know more about these topics, there's lots of interesting books and blogs to follow out there. There's also some great resources like the EFF, if you're in the US, that you can go to. And what's the one? I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry for the dead air. There's a lot of sites out there that will help you. NOIB. NOIB.eu is the European Center for Digital Rights, and they do a lot of investigative reporting and technical review, teardowns of different tools and things like that. I think Max Schrems is the guy that runs that. So go and check that out. Read some of Max's books. Check out that nonprofit and go down that rabbit hole. There's lots of stuff on there.
Amazing and interesting. There's so much more to uncover. You've taught us a lot today. We could have spoken for a lot longer. I think these topics lead quite nicely into a future podcast, and we would love to have you on again in the future, but that's unfortunately all we have time for today. Thank you very much for your time and your rich insights, Adam. It's been educational for us all, and a topic I think everyone will want to know more about.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to stuff in the future.
Fantastic. And to the listeners, as always, drop your questions and feedbacks to us. We'll pick out some to be answered on future podcasts. Don't forget to like and share, reach as many people as possible, especially with some really good tips and information that we shared today. But it is bye from us. Thanks once again, Adam.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ciao for now.